Christmas Eve in Chicago brought snow that blanketed the city in deceptive peace. While families gathered around warm fires, Yoon Seok-jae walked into the nearly empty Rising Star Cafe on the south side, seeking solitude from the empire he ruled with an iron fist. The notorious Korean Mafia boss had built his reputation on never showing weakness. Tonight, surrounded by twinkling lights that mocked his isolation, the facade threatened to crack. Behind the counter, Talia Moore wiped down tables for the third time, stretching her shift to avoid the empty apartment that reminded her of everything she'd lost. Her daughter Nia colored quietly in a corner booth, unaware that the man in the expensive coat carried more danger in his presence than her mother's neighborhood had seen in years. What none of them knew was that a child's simple act of kindness would shatter carefully constructed walls, transform 3 lives forever, and prove that redemption sometimes arrives wrapped in the most unexpected packages. The bell above the door chimed softly as Yoon Seok-jae stepped into the warmth of Rising Star Cafe. Snow melted on his black wool coat, custom-tailored Italian fabric, the kind of detail that separated men like him from the streets that raised them. His sharp features held the calculated coldness of someone who'd learned early that emotion was a liability. At 34, Seok-jae commanded Chicago's Korean underground with methodical precision. Second-generation Korean-American, he'd inherited his father's organization and expanded it beyond the elder Yoon's wildest ambitions. The tattoo curling up his neck, a black dragon in traditional Korean ink, marked him as belonging to a world where loyalty was bought in blood and trust was a fairy tale told to fools. 4 buttons of his white shirt hung open despite the December cold, revealing the dragon's head resting against his collarbone. He didn't feel the temperature anymore. He'd stopped feeling most things 3 years ago. "We're open," a woman's voice called from behind the counter. Rich, warm, touched with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying the world on your shoulders and pretending the weight didn't hurt. Talia Moore emerged from the kitchen, her dark brown skin glowing in the cafe's golden light. Her natural hair was pulled into a practical bun, a few rebellious curls framing features that would be stunning if they weren't shadowed by bone-deep weariness. She wore the cafe's uniform, a simple black shirt and jeans, like armor against the world's cruelty. "Coffee, please," Seok-jae said, his voice carrying the particular flatness of someone carefully controlling every syllable. "Black, and I'll stay a while, if that's acceptable." Counter or booth? Booth. Far corner, away from the windows, away from the door. Habits formed in blood didn't break just because it was Christmas Eve. Talia's gaze flickered over him, assessing, categorizing, filing away details with the sharp awareness of someone who'd learned to read danger before it struck. Expensive coat, confident posture, hands that had never known manual labor, eyes that had seen things that left permanent shadows. "Corner booth's all yours," she said neutrally, coffee coming right up. As Seok-jae moved past the counter, a small voice piped up from a corner booth near the kitchen. "Mama, can I have more orange juice?" "In a minute, baby. Let me help this gentleman first." Seok-jae's step hitched, barely perceptible, but there. He hadn't expected a child. The cafe should have been empty, a sanctuary from the world's noise. Instead, there was this small girl with her coloring books, her innocent presence an intrusion on his carefully planned solitude. He settled into the booth furthest from both the door and the child, shrugging off his coat. The dragon tattoo seemed to move in the cafe's flickering lights, its scales rendered in such intricate detail that some said you could count every individual marking. Talia brought his coffee in a simple white mug, no flourishes, no small talk. "Let me know if you need anything else." "Thank you." He wrapped his fingers around the cup's warmth, staring into the black liquid like it held answers to questions he'd stopped asking. From her position at the counter, Talia watched him with the particular attention of a mother who'd developed finely tuned instincts for threats. This man radiated danger the way most people radiated warmth. Everything about him screamed money, power, and the kind of control that came from making hard choices and living with the consequences. But there was something else too, something in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself apart from the world, loneliness maybe, or grief wearing a different mask. "Mama," Nia's voice carried across the empty cafe. "Is that man okay?" He looked sad. "Shh, baby. That's not our business." Talia's voice held gentle reproach, But she couldn't help glancing back at the corner booth. The man sat perfectly still, coffee growing cold between his palms, staring at nothing. Or maybe staring at everything. All the ghosts this particular night summoned, all the memories that hurt worse because of the season's false promise of joy. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming Chicago's harsh edges into something softer, kinder. Inside the Rising Star Cafe, 3 people occupied the same space, but lived in completely different worlds. Talia returned to her closing duties, counting the register with practiced efficiency. Nia went back to her coloring book, creating elaborate scenes with her worn crayons, and Seok-jae sat in his corner, wrapped in isolation of his own making, convinced that this night would pass like all the others, marked by absence rather than presence, by what he'd lost rather than what he might find. He was wrong. The first crack in his armor came not from a rival's bullet or a detective's investigation. It came from a 7-year-old girl with ribbons in her hair and a heart too big for a world this cruel. But that moment waited ahead, gathering force like snow before an avalanche. For now they simply existed in their separate spheres, unaware that Christmas Eve in Chicago would prove that some walls, no matter how carefully constructed, couldn't withstand the determined assault of innocent compassion. The cafe's old heater hummed, fighting against the December cold. Talia's hands moved through familiar motions, wiping, stacking, counting. Nia's crayons scratched against paper, creating color where before there was only white. And Seok-jae sat in his expensive suit and his invisible walls, a man who'd forgotten that being untouchable meant being utterly alone. 20 minutes passed in relative silence. Talia's movements around the cafe created a soothing rhythm, the clink of cups being cleaned, the soft pad of her feet on worn linoleum, the occasional murmur as she responded to Nia's questions about her artwork. Seok-jae ordered a second coffee, then a third. Each time Talia brought it without comment, professional distance maintained. She'd learned not to ask questions about customers who looked like walking contradictions, designer clothes in a working-class cafe, expensive watches checking time that clearly held no meaning, eyes that tracked every movement but seemed to see nothing at all. "We'll be closing in 30 minutes, she said during her 4th trip to his table, her tone neither warm nor cold. "You're welcome to stay until then." "Understood." His gaze finally lifted to meet hers, and for a moment something flickered in those dark eyes. Recognition, maybe. Not of her specifically, but of the particular exhaustion she carried. The kind that came from fighting battles no one else could see. After she'd walked away, Seok-jae found himself watching the interaction between mother and daughter. Not obviously, years of training made sure he never gave away what he observed, but with growing attention. "Mama, will Santa know we moved?" Nia's voice carried concern that twisted something in Seok-jae's chest. "We didn't have a chimney at the old place, but we don't have one here either. Santa's magic, baby. He'll find you." Talia's voice held the particular firmness of someone willing a truth into existence. "Now finish your picture. We need to catch the bus soon. Can't we call an Uber? It's snowing really hard." "The bus is fine, Nia. Don't argue with me tonight." The exchange told Seok-jae everything he needed to know. Single mother, working Christmas Eve for extra money, living somewhere that required bus rides in snowstorms, making promises about Santa while wearing shoes that had been resoled more than once, fighting to give her daughter a childhood that the world seemed determined to steal. He recognized the fight. His own mother had waged the same battle before cancer claimed her when he was 12. She'd worked 3 jobs to keep him fed, clothed, enrolled in the Catholic school she believed would save him from the streets. It hadn't. Nothing could have saved him from what he became, but she'd tried. That counted for something. "Sweetheart, I'm going to start the final cleanup," Talia called to Nia. "Stay in your booth and don't bother the gentleman, okay?" "Okay, Mama." While Talia disappeared into the kitchen, Seok-jae pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages that detailed his empire's movements. A shipment arriving at the docks, a territory dispute in Lincoln Park, a rival family making noise about boundaries and respect, the usual chaos that required his constant attention. His second-in-command had sent 6 texts in the last hour, each one more insistent. Where was he? They had business to conduct. Christmas didn't stop their operations. In fact, it accelerated them. People sought comfort in vices, and Seok-jae's organization provided everything from gambling to protection to substances that made harsh realities bearable. He should respond. should leave this cafe and return to the penthouse suite on the Gold Coast, where his lieutenants waited with updates, problems, decisions that only he could make. Should stop pretending that sitting in a rundown coffee shop changed anything about who he was or what his life had become. But the snow kept falling, and the cafe's warmth held him in place, and for reasons he couldn't quite articulate, walking out that door felt like admitting defeat to something he couldn't name. Movement caught his attention. The little girl, Nia, her mother had called her, had slid out of her booth and was approaching his table. Talia was still in the kitchen, the sound of running water suggesting she'd started the final dishwashing. Seok-jae's body tensed automatically. He wasn't good with children. Didn't know how to talk to them, what to say, how to be anything other than what he was. And what he was would terrify any sensible child. "Hi, mister," Nia said, stopping a respectful distance from his table. She wore a pink sweater decorated with snowflakes, her hair pulled into 2 puffs secured with red ribbons. Her brown eyes held the particular clarity of someone who hadn't yet learned that the world demanded you hide your heart. "I'm Nia. What's your name?" "Seok-jae." The name felt strange on his tongue, stripped of titles and honorifics. Just a name, offered to a child who wouldn't recognize it as belonging to someone dangerous. "That's a pretty name. Is it Korean? We learned about Korea in school. They have really cool cities and food and, oh," her eyes widened with sudden realization. "Are you from Korea? My teacher says it's important to learn about different cultures because the world is a big place and we should all be friends." Despite everything, despite the walls and the control and the careful distance he maintained from all human connection, Seok-jae felt his lips curve into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't quite nothing either. "I was born here," he said, "in Chicago, but my parents came from Korea." "That's like my friend Marcus. His grandma came from Jamaica. She makes the best beef patties." Nia's enthusiasm was utterly genuine, her worldview still innocent enough to see connections instead of divisions. "Do you have a grandma?" "No. She passed away before I was born." "Oh, I'm sorry." The sympathy in her voice was real, uncomplicated by adult awkwardness. "I don't have a grandma either. Or a grandpa. Or a daddy anymore." The casual mention of loss hit harder than Seok-jae expected. "I'm sorry too." "It's okay. Mama says Daddy's watching from heaven, and he'd want us to be happy. So we try really hard to be happy, even when things are tough." She tilted her head, studying him with the particular intensity of children who haven't learned that staring is rude. "You look tough too. Are you trying to be happy?" The question pierced through layers of carefully constructed defenses, finding vulnerable places Seok-jae had believed were completely armored. When had anyone last asked him about happiness? When had he last considered it a possibility rather than a weakness? He stopped, unsure how to answer. His phone buzzed again, another message from the world that demanded his immediate attention. But he didn't reach for it. "That's a complicated question." "Grown-ups always say that," Nia said wisely. "But I think it's actually really simple. Either things make you happy or they don't. And if they don't, maybe you should try different things." "Is that what your mother teaches you?" "No, that's what I figured out myself. Mama teaches me to be brave and kind and work hard. But happiness..." She considered seriously. "I think we have to decide that for ourselves." Before Seok-jae could respond to this unexpectedly profound observation, Talia emerged from the kitchen, concern flashing across her features as she spotted her daughter at the stranger's table. "Nia Moore, what did I tell you?" Her voice held gentle reproach as she quickly crossed the cafe. "I'm so sorry, sir. She knows better than to bother customers." "She's not bothering me." The words surprised them both. Talia because she'd expected polite dismissal, Seok-jae because he'd meant them. But Talia was already ushering Nia back to their booth, her protective instincts overriding any social niceties. This was her daughter, her responsibility, her fierce determination to keep safe in a world that had already taken too much. "Go get your backpack together, baby," Talia told Nia, her hand gentle on her daughter's shoulder. "We need to catch the 9:15 bus." After Nia scampered off to gather her things, Talia turned back to Seok-jae, something protective and challenging in her stance. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you're running from. I'm not running from anything. Everyone who sits alone in a cafe on Christmas Eve is running from something." Her voice held the particular wisdom of someone who'd done her own share of running. But my daughter is off limits. She's friendly, she doesn't understand stranger danger the way she should, and I need you to know that whatever's going on with you, she's not part of it. Seok-jae studied her, really looked at her for the first time. Beneath the exhaustion and wariness, he saw strength, the kind forged in fire, tested by loss, tempered by a mother's desperate love. She was protecting her child the only way she knew how, with the only weapons she had: boundaries, words, the fierce determination to be enough. "I understand," he said quietly, "and I respect that. Your daughter is bright, brave. You're raising her well." The unexpected compliment seemed to disarm Talia slightly. "Thank you. She's everything to me." A pause, something vulnerable flickering across her features before she reinforced her walls. "If you're planning to stay much longer, I'll need to ask you to leave. We close in 15 minutes. "Of course." Seok-jae reached for his wallet, pulling out several bills. "For the coffee." Talia's eyes widened at the amount, easily 5 times what 3 cups of coffee cost, even with a generous tip. "Sir, I can't—" "It's Christmas Eve. Consider it a holiday tip." He stood, retrieving his coat with practiced grace. "Thank you for the coffee. And the conversation." "We didn't really have a conversation." "No," he agreed, something shifting in his expression. "But your daughter did. And it was illuminating." He was halfway to the door when it happened. Nia had climbed up on her booth to retrieve her coat from the hook, her small body stretching for the fabric just out of reach. The booth was old, the vinyl seat worn smooth. Her foot slipped. She fell backward, the angle wrong, her head aimed directly for the table's sharp corner. Seok-jae moved without thinking, pure instinct overriding calculation. He crossed the space in 3 rapid strides, catching Nia before she hit, his arms secure around her small frame as he absorbed the impact of her fall. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Nia giggled, completely oblivious to the danger she'd been in, delighted by the unexpected adventure. Whoa! That was like flying. "Nia!" Talia rushed over, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Oh my God, baby, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mama. The mister caught me." Nia beamed up at Seok-jae, completely trusting, absolutely certain of her safety in his arms. Seok-jae carefully set her down, his hands trembling slightly, a reaction that would have alarmed his lieutenants, who'd never seen him display physical evidence of emotion. "You should be more careful." "I will," Nia promised, then threw her arms around his waist in an impulsive hug. "Thank you for saving me." The embrace lasted perhaps 3 seconds. 3 seconds during which Seok-jae stood frozen, arms awkwardly suspended, having absolutely no idea how to respond to this spontaneous display of affection from a child who didn't know what he was. When Nia pulled back, still smiling, Seok-jae met Talia's gaze. She looked shaken, her professional distance shattered by maternal terror and gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice unsteady. "If you hadn't been there." "But I was." He retrieved his coat again, needing to leave before this moment became something he couldn't walk away from. "Be careful getting home. The roads are dangerous tonight." "We're taking the bus." Talia stopped, something in his expression making her reconsider finishing that sentence. The bus in this weather. It wasn't a question. Seok-jae looked out at the snow, falling heavier now, coating the streets in treacherous white. "Where do you live?" "That's not your concern." "Humor me." Talia's jaw set stubbornly. She didn't owe this stranger any explanations, didn't need his judgment or his pity. But something about the way he'd caught Nia, the careful gentleness of his movements, made her answer despite her better judgment. "Inglewood. About 40 minutes on the bus. Longer in this weather." Seok-jae pulled out his phone, typing rapidly. "I'm calling you a car service." "Absolutely not." "It's already done. The car will be here in 5 minutes." He held up a hand as she started to protest. "Consider it payment for the conversation your daughter gave me. Fair trade." "I don't accept charity." "It's not charity. It's basic human decency on a night when a mother and daughter shouldn't be waiting for buses in a snowstorm." His voice held authority that didn't invite argument. "Besides, I own the car service. It's no inconvenience." The admission hung in the air, the first real piece of information he'd offered about himself. Talia's eyes narrowed, reassessing him with new context. A man who owned car services, wore $1,000 suits and sat alone in working-class cafes on Christmas Eve. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "Someone passing through." Seok-jae buttoned his coat, preparing to step back into the winter night. "Someone who's grateful your daughter reminded me that kindness still exists in the world." Before Talia could respond, before she could thank him or question him or tell him that she had this under control, Nia's voice cut through the tension. "Mister?" The little girl had been quiet during the exchange, watching with the particular attention of children who understand more than adults credit them for. "Why are you crying?" The question stopped everything. Seok-jae's hand went to his face automatically, fingers finding wetness on his cheeks that he hadn't noticed. When had the tears started? During the catch, during the hug, during the realization that this child's easy trust was something he'd never earn if she knew the truth. He couldn't remember the last time he'd cried. Years, certainly, maybe since his mother's funeral, when he'd been 12 and determined to prove he was man enough to survive without her. The tears felt foreign on his skin, a weakness he couldn't afford, evidence of cracks in armor that needed to remain impenetrable. "I'm not," he started, but stopped. Lying to her felt wrong. Nia moved closer, her small hand reaching out to take his much larger one. The gesture was natural, guileless, offered with the particular generosity of someone who didn't understand that comfort was something you rationed carefully. "It's okay to be sad sometimes," she said seriously. "Mama says tears are just feelings that overflow when we try to keep them all inside. She says it's braver to let them out than to pretend they don't exist." Seok-jae looked at this child, 7 years old, living in Englewood, taking buses in snowstorms, missing her father, celebrating Christmas with worn crayons and hope, and saw a kind of courage he'd never possessed. The courage to remain soft in a world that demanded hardness, to offer kindness when experience taught withholding, to believe in goodness despite evidence to the contrary. "Don't cry, mister," Nia said gently, squeezing his hand. "You can borrow my mom if you need one. She gives really good hugs and she always makes things better." The offer, so innocent, so generous, so completely impossible, broke something fundamental inside Yoon Seok-jae. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of ice cracking beneath spring's first warmth. Talia saw the precise moment the stranger's control shattered, saw his chest hitch, his jaw clench, his eyes close briefly against whatever memory Nia's words had summoned. When he opened them again, they held a raw vulnerability that made him look years younger, less dangerous, more human. "That's very kind," he managed, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "But I should go. Your car is waiting." He was right. Through the cafe's front window, a sleek black sedan had pulled up to the curb, completely out of place in this neighborhood. The driver got out, opening the rear door in a display of service that Talia had only ever seen in movies. "Come on, baby," Talia said, gathering their belongings with quick efficiency. "Let's get you home." But Nia wasn't ready to leave. She stood on her tiptoes, tugging gently at Seok-jae's sleeve until he bent down to her level. Then, with the particular solemnity of someone performing an important ritual, she wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him fiercely. "Merry Christmas, mister," she whispered. "I hope you find something that makes you happy." When she pulled back, Seok-jae's carefully constructed mask had completely disintegrated. He looked at this child like she was something precious and fragile, something he wanted to protect but didn't know how. "Merry Christmas, Nia," he said quietly. Then, looking up at Talia, "Take care of each other." "We always do," Talia replied, something unspoken passing between them. Recognition, maybe, of two people who'd learned survival the hard way and carried scars the world couldn't see. Seok-jae watched them settle into the car, Nia pressing her face against the window and waving enthusiastically until the sedan disappeared into the snowy night. Then he stood alone in the empty cafe, surrounded by Christmas decorations that seemed to mock his isolation. His phone buzzed insistently, more messages from his second-in-command. A situation developing that required his immediate attention. Rivals making moves while he wasted time in sentiment. But Seok-jae didn't move. Not yet. Instead, he walked back to the booth where Nia had been coloring, finding the picture she'd left behind. A family, stick figures drawn in bright crayons, holding hands beneath a smiling sun. 3 figures, Their woman, a child, and next to them, added in darker colors, a taller figure, a man with something that might have been a dragon curling up his neck. She'd drawn him into her family. The realization settled in his chest with unexpected weight. This child, who'd known him for less than an hour, had seen something worth including in her perfect world, had offered him belonging without conditions, comfort without questions, acceptance without judgment. And he was a man who destroyed things, who built empires on fear and maintained control through calculated violence, who'd learned at his father's knee that mercy was weakness and emotion was a liability that got you killed. What could he possibly offer a child like Nia except contamination? Seok-jae pulled out his phone, this time not to check messages from his organization, but to make a different kind of call. "Jin," he said when his most trusted lieutenant answered. "I need information on someone. Talia Moore works at Rising Star Cafe on South Ashland. Find out everything, where she lives, her financial situation, any debts, any threats, and I want it done quietly. No one approaches her, no one contacts her. Just information. Boss is everything. Just do it, Jin. And send me the surveillance routes for Englewood. I want to know which streets are being watched and which ones aren't." After ending the call, Seok-jae made another, this one to the car service manager. "The woman and child I just sent home, make sure the driver waits until they're safely inside. Then, I want regular service arranged. Nothing obvious, nothing that would frighten them. Just make sure they're not taking buses in snowstorms." The arrangements took 10 minutes. By the time he finished, his organization's normal operations had been temporarily suspended, his lieutenants ordered to handle routine business without him. His entire focus shifted to something he couldn't quite name, but felt with absolute certainty. Seok-jae locked the cafe door behind him. Talia had left him the keys, trusting him to secure the place. Another small gesture of faith that felt monumental, and stepped into the Chicago night. The snow had stopped, leaving the city draped in pristine white. Christmas lights twinkled in windows. Families gathered around tables visible through sheer curtains. The world celebrating a holiday that had never felt further from Seok-jae's reach. But something had changed. Some fundamental shift in how he saw his place in the universe, triggered by a child's innocent compassion and a mother's fierce protection. He'd spent 15 years building walls, constructing defenses, ensuring that nothing and no one could touch whatever remained of his humanity. 15 years convinced that isolation equaled strength, that detachment equaled survival. One 7-year-old girl had demolished those convictions in under an hour. His phone rang. Jin, with preliminary information. "Boss, I've got basic details. Talia Moore, 28, widow. Husband died 2 years ago in a workplace accident. She works 3 jobs: cafe, cleaning service, weekend retail. Lives in Englewood, rental apartment, current on payments but barely. No debts beyond normal bills, no criminal record, no red flags." "And the daughter?" "Nia Moore, 7, 2nd grade. Good student, no issues. Attends public school in their district." Everything Jin said painted a picture Seok-jae had already assembled from observation. A woman fighting impossible odds with nothing but determination, raising a daughter who somehow remained full of light, despite circumstances that should have dimmed her spirit. "What else?" Seok-jae asked, because Jin's tone suggested more. "The building they live in. It's in territory that's being contested, not by us. We stay out of residential zones. But the Volkov family has been expanding, and there's been some pressure on landlords to sell. Nothing violent yet, but it could escalate." The information crystallized something in Seok-jae's mind. He'd asked Jin for surveillance routes, for protection possibilities, but he hadn't admitted why. Hadn't articulated the fierce protectiveness that had awakened when Nia fell, when she hugged him, when she offered to share her mother with a stranger, because she couldn't bear to see someone sad. "I want that building and the surrounding block under passive watch," Seok-jae ordered. "Nothing obvious. I don't want them knowing. But if the Volkovs make any moves, I want to know immediately. And Jin, this stays between us." "Understood, boss. Should I ask why we're protecting civilians in Englewood?" "No." Seok-jae's voice held finality. "You shouldn't." Christmas morning arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. In her small apartment in Englewood, Talia woke early, as she always did, her body trained by years of multiple jobs to maximize every waking hour. Nia still slept, curled beneath blankets decorated with cartoon characters, her face peaceful in the grey morning light. On the floor beside her bed sat the modest pile of presents Talia had managed to scrape together. A few used books from the thrift store, new crayons and a colouring book, a warm winter coat that was practical rather than exciting but desperately needed. Not much by any standard, but everything Talia could provide, bought with money earned from extra shifts and careful budgeting and the particular mathematics of poverty, where every dollar required calculation. She was brewing coffee when someone knocked on the door. Talia froze. Nobody knocked at 7 a.m. on Christmas morning. Nobody knew their address except her supervisor at the cafe, the school, and the stranger from last night. The man with the expensive coat and the dragon tattoo, and the eyes that held too many shadows. The man who'd called them a car, and left Nia's picture behind like evidence of some crime he couldn't quite confess to. She checked the peephole, heart pounding, half expecting to see him standing there with whatever truth he'd been hiding. Instead, she found a delivery person holding a massive stack of wrapped packages, looking somewhat bewildered by the early hour and the address. "Talia Moore?" the woman asked when Talia cautiously opened the door. "Yes? Delivery for you and Nia Moore. Sign here, please." The packages kept coming. Toys, clothes, books, art supplies, everything carefully chosen, age-appropriate, exactly what a 7-year-old girl might want. And for Talia, grocery gift cards, a winter coat in her exact size, an envelope containing cash with a simple note, "For the bus rides you won't need to take. A friend." No name, no explanation, just generosity that felt both overwhelming and somehow inevitable. Talia knew who'd sent them. Knew with absolute certainty that the stranger from Rising Star Cafe had somehow arranged this, had made decisions about her daughter's Christmas based on one brief conversation and whatever he'd observed in that hour. She should feel violated. Angry that someone had inserted themselves into her life without permission, had investigated them enough to know addresses and sizes and needs. She would recognize this for what it probably was, the dangerous interest of someone who lived in a world she wanted nothing to do with. But all she felt was the particular ache of being seen, of having her struggles recognized and addressed without judgment, without requirement for gratitude or repayment. "Mama." Nia appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Why are there so many presents? Talia struggled for explanation. Someone sent them, a friend. The sad mister from the cafe? Nia's face lit up with delight rather than suspicion. He wasn't sad anymore. He must have found something that made him happy. The innocent conclusion twisted something in Talia's chest. Her daughter's worldview remained uncomplicated by adult cynicism, still believed that kindness existed without ulterior motives, that strangers could become friends through simple human connection. Maybe she was right. Maybe the man with the dragon tattoo and the expensive coat had found something that made him happy, not in the presents themselves, but in the giving. In connecting with two people who'd reminded him that walls built for protection could also become prisons of isolation. The days after Christmas brought subtle changes to Talia's world. The car service appeared regularly. Drivers who claimed their company provided free rides to cafe employees as a holiday promotion. Her landlord suddenly reduced her rent, citing a clerical error in the original amount. The cafe manager gave her a raise, insisting she'd earned it, though Talia knew the timing was suspiciously convenient. She wasn't naive. Recognized the invisible hand arranging circumstances, smoothing paths, removing obstacles with efficiency that suggested resources and influence she couldn't match. She should be frightened, should recognize danger in generosity this coordinated, this comprehensive. But Nia bloomed under the reduced stress. Smiled more easily, worried less about their tight budget, started bringing home better grades because she wasn't exhausted from long bus rides and cold walks. And Talia found herself sleeping better, eating regularly, remembering what it felt like to not constantly operate in survival mode. The stranger never appeared, never contacted her directly, never demanded acknowledgement or gratitude, just helped. Quietly, efficiently, without fanfare or expectation. Until New Year's Eve, when Talia worked another closing shift at Rising Star Cafe. The bell above the door chimed at 10 p.m., and there he was. Same expensive coat, same carefully controlled expression, same shadows in his eyes. But something had shifted, some fundamental change in how he carried himself, a a softness around the edges that hadn't existed before. "Coffee?" Talia asked, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Please, and—" He hesitated, something vulnerable crossing his features. "Conversation, if you're willing." Talia glanced at Nia, doing homework in her usual booth, then back at this man who'd changed their lives without asking permission. "I think we're due for a conversation." She poured 2 coffees, settled across from him in the booth, and waited. Whatever came next, confession, explanation, the truth about who he was and what he wanted, she'd face it the way she faced everything, with courage forged in hardship, and a mother's fierce determination to protect what mattered most. "I need to tell you something," Seok-jae began, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup like it provided necessary anchor. "About who I am, what I do, and why I can't seem to walk away from a cafe where a little girl reminded me that I used to be human." "I'm listening," Talia said quietly, and despite every warning instinct, every lesson learned about men who appeared too good to be true, she found herself genuinely willing to hear his story. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, or not at all. Because some walls once breached couldn't be rebuilt, and some connections once made proved stronger than all the reasons to stay apart. 6 months later, Nia's 8th birthday fell on a Saturday bright with summer sunshine. The party took place not in their Englewood apartment, but in the private garden of a Gold Coast penthouse that Talia still couldn't quite believe she had access to. Seok-jae had been honest that New Year's Eve, brutally, completely honest about his organization, his past, the empire built on activities that existed in legal grey zones and moral darkness. He'd expected her to run, to take Nia, and disappear from his life with justified fear. Instead, Talia had asked 3 questions. "Do you hurt innocent people? Do you traffic in anything that destroys families? Will you ever bring this violence to my daughter?" His answers, "No, never. And I'd die first," had been enough. Not because Talia was naive, but because she'd learned to recognize truth when she heard it, especially truth that cost something to admit. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, with Nia's well-being as the constant center. Seok-jae never pushed, never demanded more than Talia offered, never tried to replace the father Nia had lost. Instead, he became something else, a presence, a protector, eventually a partner in the careful work of building family from fractured pieces. Now, watching Nia laugh with her friends, wearing the birthday dress she'd chosen herself, surrounded by joy and security and love, Talia felt the particular peace of someone who'd survived impossible odds and found unexpected grace. "She's happy," Seok-jae said quietly, appearing at Talia's elbow with his customary silence. 6 months together, and he could still move like a shadow when he chose. "She is." Talia leaned into his shoulder, the gesture natural now, earned through countless conversations and shared meals and the slow building of trust. "We both are." His arm settled around her waist, the dragon tattoo on his neck visible above his collar, a mark of his past that he no longer tried to hide. "I never thought I'd have this. Family. Belonging." "A little girl offered to share her mother," Talia reminded him, her voice warm with remembered wonder. "How could you resist?" Across the garden, Nia looked up and waved enthusiastically, her smile bright enough to shame the summer sun. Seok-jae waved back, something soft and unguarded crossing his features, the expression of a man who'd found redemption in the last place he expected. He'd never be perfect, would always carry shadows from a past he couldn't erase. But he'd learned something that Christmas Eve. Walls built for protection could also become prisons, and sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was accept the gift of being seen. "Don't cry, mister," Nia had said. "You can borrow my mom." She'd given him so much more than a borrowed comfort. She'd given him a reason to believe that even the most carefully constructed armor could be dismantled, that even the most damaged hearts could learn to trust again, and that family was something you built, not something you were born into. Christmas in Chicago had brought snow and isolation and a chance encounter that changed everything. Summer brought celebration, joy, and the particular peace of knowing that sometimes the best gifts came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. 3 people who'd been alone had found each other, and that, Seok-jae thought as Nia ran over to pull him toward the birthday cake, was a miracle worth more than any empire he could build.